Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight we will be doing Parshat Chukat. Parshat Chukat has many different incidences in it. It begins with what's called the paradoxical. Zot Chukat Torah. This is the chok of the Torah. A chok, Chukat, is a type of mitzvah that we don't know the reason for it. And most of the time on the surface, it almost defies logic, supersedes normative logic or intellect. That's what's called a chok. And there are two different opinions how to approach a chok. Since it's a type of mitzvah that we don't know the real reason for, so many people say that we shouldn't even attempt to find a meaning for it. It's a decree from God. In fact, Rashi explains that it's a decree from God, and we do it because we believe in the Torah and we believe in the mitzvahs of the Torah, and so we do it. Other people agree that we might not know the real reason from God's point of view, but nonetheless, we have every right to try to understand many different perspectives. Most people hold like that. That's why you have many different explanations of this mitzvah. This mitzvah is called Zot Chukat Torah. This is the main chok of the Torah because of its paradoxical nature. The paradoxical nature of this mitzvah is, here someone has the impurity called tumat met, the impurity of death. And the mitzvah that the beginning of this parsha tells us about is how to take a red heifer, completely red heifer. We're told that in history, there's only been 9 totally red heifers, and you slaughter it and you burn it until there's only ash, and you put in hyssop and cedar wood and a string that is dyed from scarlet from a worm, and you mix it with living waters, this whole concoction, and then you sprinkle it on a person on the 3rd and 7th day, and they become ritually pure. At the time of the temple, if someone had been in contact with the dead, they could not go to the temple unless they went through this procedure. The paradoxical nature is that those who are involved in preparing the mixture or the concoction, they become impure. And yet the formula that they put together, the concoction, makes those who are impure pure. So it makes the pure impure and the impure pure. So this is called like one of the paradoxes of the Torah. And we're actually told in the oral tradition that even King Solomon, who is considered the wisest of all people, could not grasp in full the meaning of this paradoxical mitzvah. We're also told that the nations of the world would taunt Israel. They would look at this mitzvah and say, what in the world is this mitzvah? Why are you doing this? Especially if you don't even know the real reason for it. So tonight, I'm just going to present 2 different ideas. There are many ideas of trying to understand this paradox. One I wrote about in Orchard of Delights. Many of you have Orchard of Delights, and you could look in it yourself. I'll just review it quickly. The idea is that the people who are preparing the paraduma, the red heifer, they become impure. And so what we can learn from this is, first of all, it was hard work to prepare everything that needed to be done in order to purify other people. So here we're taking it somewhat out of the realm of just this narrow event of preparing the red heifer and trying to understand in a more psychological, emotional, spiritual way. So the idea is that many times when we want to accomplish something, most of the time it takes hard work. And a lot of that hard work is work that we don't necessarily enjoy, but it's just something that has to be done in order to complete the task. It could be a 10-minute task. It could be a 10-month task. It could be a 10-year task. Let's say someone who wants to be a doctor. So from the time they enter into undergraduate school, and then go to graduate school, and then go through all the different levels of residency, it's a good 10, 12 years. And a lot of that is very hard work, long nights, lots of study, and lots of challenges. And yet, this is what the person wants to accomplish. And so the idea is that someone who is pure becomes impure. Here, we're not talking in the ritual sense. We're talking more in just like the practical sense. And the Baal Shem Tov explains that sometimes if you want to help someone who is stuck in a ditch, their wagon fell in a ditch, they fell into the mud, they can't get themselves up, that sometimes the only way to get someone out of the mud, out of the ditch, is to go into the ditch yourself in order to help them out. And in the process, probably get very, very dirty. But you're doing a mitzvah. You're helping someone out, especially someone who's in a pretty bad way if they're stuck in a mud hole. But the person who is helping is going to get muddy as well. Sometimes it just can't be avoided. So we can take that idea and superimpose it on this idea that the pure become impure in their attempt to make those who are impure pure. So this I wrote about in Orchard of Delights. Now, tonight, I want to bring a second explanation from the Baal Shem Tov, because the first explanation I just brought, the idea of having to go down to the ditch, the Baal Shem Tov didn't say in the context of this mitzvah of paraduma, but he does have a Torah about how we can understand on a spiritual level this idea of the paraduma, of the red heifer. And so the Baal Shem Tov explains, and again, he takes it out of the context and puts it into a broader perspective. And he says, what does it mean to be impure of the impurity of death? So he equates death on a psychological, emotional, intellectual level, the idea of being apathetic, being lazy, having no motivation, being stuck in rote and routine, having low self-esteem, all these different ideas he equates with it's like death. The person is going through the motions of living, but on an emotional level, they feel somewhat trapped, or we use the word death. And so what do you do? In other words, you've been touched by the impurity of death. So he explains that in such a case, his advice was to do something that usually is almost like a no-no. And that is to build yourself up, to say to yourself, this is a phrase from the sages, that a person should look at the world and themselves as if God made the world for me. Now, obviously, that can lead to a very big ego, lots of pride. But the Baal Shem Tov says that if you're stuck with, as I mentioned, apathetic, low self-esteem, no inspiration, no path forward, just stuck in your ways, then at that point, you do need to build yourself up. And you have to realize that I'm created in the image of God. I have a divine soul. And it's not appropriate for me to be stuck like this. And so you build yourself up. And one of the verses that's brought is, Vayigva libo b'darchei Hashem. You raise up your heart in the way of Hashem. In other words, I have a mitzvah to do, and I'm gonna do it, even though there might be a voice in my head saying, "Oh, come on! You really think you're going to accomplish this? You really think this mitzvah is going to make any difference in the world? It's going to make any difference to you? Why waste your time?" These kind of negative voices that we have to overcome, and we have to build ourselves up, and including our ego, and go forward and get out of the mud. Now the Baal Shem Tov explains, here's the paradox. Because usually a built-up ego, too much pride, seeing yourself as the center of the world, the whole world is created for me, this leads to impurity. So that's how he explains the paradox here, that the pure become impure and the impure become pure. So to get out of the being stuck, we have to adopt, again, we'll just use the phrase like a big ego just to get out. But that ego is going to make you tameh, is going to make you impure. So then the Baal Shem Tov says, well, then how do you become pure again? So he says immediately you have to take a stance of humbleness. Yes, you have to build yourself up. Yes, God created the whole world for me. I am in the image of God. I am strong. I can do it. But at the very same time, with an attitude of humbleness. And then that will take the impure and make the impure pure again. That's how the Baal Shem Tov explains this mitzvah on a spiritual level. Because if you remember, one of the pillars of Chassidut is whatever we learn in the Torah, whatever story, whatever personality, whatever mitzvah, we always have, the first thing we have to say is, what does it mean to me today? How is it relevant to me? How do I take whatever the lesson is and integrate it into my very being? So this mitzvah we don't have right now, because we don't have a temple and we don't have the red heifer. And so you would say, well, why do we even have to learn about this? But that goes for so many of the mitzvahs in the Torah. And the Baal Shem Tov taught that not even those mitzvahs that we don't do today, maybe even more so, is we have to learn to translate them into the psychological, spiritual realm and make it relevant to us. So that's how the Baal Shem Tov explains the paradox of the pure become impure through preparing the concoction of the red heifer, and it makes the impure pure. So that way we have, in a certain way, narrowed it down to a way that's very relevant to us today. Is on one hand, we have to build ourselves up to understand like who we are. If the question is, am I a body that happens to have a soul, or am I a soul that has a body? So we have to look at it that we're a soul. That's the essential us that has a body. This is not degrading the body or lessening the importance of the body, but it's putting the emphasis on the essential, and that is that we are souls. We are divine souls. Okay, so that is our first insight for tonight. Now, as I said in the beginning, this parsha has many, many different incidences that happen. And one of them is the death of Miriam. Also, Aaron dies in this parsha. This parsha has a lot to do with life and death. And so here we are in the 20th chapter of Bamidbar, the first verse of the 20th chapter. So it says, Vayavohu b'nei Yisrael kol ha'eda midbar tzin b'chodesh harishon v'yashev ha'am b'kadesh v'tamad sham Miriam v'tikaver sham. So it says, all of Israel came, the entire congregation, to the desert of Tzin in the first month of the year, that is Nisan, and the people sat in the place called Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Then the very next verse says, V'lo hayamayim le'eda. There was no water for the congregation. V'ikalu al Moshe v'Aaron. And the people gathered against Moshe and Aaron, and they're very upset, and they're angry. They don't have water, and they're complaining. And this leads to the very, very important and famous incident where God tells Moshe to talk to the rock, but instead Moshe hits the rock twice. This is also a very mysterious, paradoxical event that happens. Again, just to remind you, this is called Pathways to the Orchard. This is the third in the series of Orchard books. So this whole incident with Moshe, I deal with extensively in Orchard of Delights. So that we're not going to get into that tonight, but what we are going to get into is what we just read. Miriam dies, and the very next thing the Torah says, there was no water. So this brings us to the idea that we're told there were three gifts in the desert, and each one corresponded to Miriam, Aaron, and Moshe. The gift of water, we're told, was in the merit of Miriam. The clouds of glory that accompanied Israel throughout the experience in the desert, 40 years. It's mentioned many, many, many times, this cloud or pillar of glory. This was on the merit of Aharon, and the manna, which we'll call the food from heaven, is that people they called it in Hebrew man, because they didn't know mahu. They didn't know what it was. All they knew is they woke up in the morning and there was a layer of dew in the desert, and there was the man. This was their food. And since they didn't know what it was, so we call it like food from heaven. That was on the merit of Moshe. So what I want to do now is to look at the idea that's called the well of Miriam. So what does it mean that the water in the desert was in the merit of Miriam? So we're told that this is one of the many miracles that was happening in the desert, that there was like a stone, not a small stone, like a rock that seemed to accompany Israel through the desert. And anytime they needed water, it was like a spring. Water would come out of the rock. Back in the book of Shemot, the first time that the people complain about water, so God says, take your staff and hit the rock, and water will come out. And here, mysteriously, he also tells Moshe, take your staff, but talk to the rock. Again, it's really a very deep and complicated idea to go through all the possibilities of what happened here. And why is it for something that seems relatively minor, God prevented Moshe and Aaron from entering into the Holy Land? But here we're concentrating on the well of Miriam. So one of the great personalities in Sfat, about 500 years ago, that's when the same time the Arizal lived in Sfat, there was a great scholar, and he was called the Alshech. And to this day, there is a synagogue in Tzfat that is the synagogue of the Alshech. And I've gone there many times. It's right next to the Abuhav synagogue, also dating back. And he was a tremendous luminary. And the Arizal also went to his Shabbat drushes. He would say Torah over at Shabbat afternoon, and the Arizal would go. So that tells you what kind of level the Alshech is. So the Alshech had an opinion. A very interesting idea is the juxtaposition of Miriam dying, and immediately we're told that there's no water. So if you look at the three siblings, Miriam, Aaron, and Moshe, when Aaron dies in this parsha, it says all of Israel mourned Aaron for 30 days. Aaron was a very, very beloved individual. He brought peace between people. Everyone loved Aaron, and they mourned him for 30 days. When Moshe dies at the end of the Torah, it also says that the people mourned for him, but it doesn't say 30 days, and it doesn't say all of Israel. And this is because Moshe was more, we'll call it harder to relate to, just because he was at such a divine level. He wasn't as approachable. If you remember, when he came down with the tablets, the luchot, his face was beaming, so much so that the people were afraid to come near him. He was just too awesome. His face was beaming. So it says that they mourned him, but not with the same words, at least in the Torah, as they mourned Aharon. But about Miriam, it doesn't say at all that they mourned for her. So the Alshech said, what is this juxtaposition that there was no water right after she dies? He said it was a measure for measure because no one cried a tear. No one, at least it's not written about in the Torah. We're not saying that no one felt her absence. But because the Torah doesn't mention, it means that there was a qualitative difference in the way that they related to Miriam's death. And the Alshech said that's why the water went away. It had been given to them on her merit all these years, and they didn't mourn for her properly. And therefore the water was taken away. In the rest of the parsha, we'll see how the water comes back, and they even sing a song, the Song of the Well. It's one of the 10 archetypal songs sung through creation. But nonetheless, here the water was taken away, and because the water was taken away, it led to Moshe getting a bit upset with the people and hitting the rock instead of talking to it, which is more like, instead of talking nicely to the people, Moshe, even in the most subtle way, seems to have lost his cool, and he got somewhat angry at the people. And instead of talking to the rock, he hit the rock, indicating that he had lost his patience. So let's look deeper, though, at the connection of Miriam and water. So let's look at the name Miriam. So first of all, if you break up the name Miriam by syllable, you have Mar Yam, the bitter sea, the bitter waters of the sea. If you take the first two letters of Mar and you reverse them, it's Ram. Ram means elevated sea, or elevated waters of the sea. So how does this apply to Miriam? And also, if you take the letters of Miriam, the word Mayim is in her name. It's the letters of Mayim, water, and a Resh. That's Miriam. So obviously, Miriam has a lot to do with water, and that's how we can understand that on her merit, there was water in the desert. So how do we see that more specifically? So we know the story that when the parents of Moshe put him in an ark on the Nile River, so we're told that Miriam watched and followed the ark until she saw that the daughter of Pharaoh and her helpers had brought the ark. And she was the one who ran over to the daughter of Pharaoh and said, would you like me to find a nursemaid for this child? And the daughter of Pharaoh said, yes. So she went back to her own mother, to Moshe's mother, and that's who breastfed him for 2 years. After 2 years, the daughter of Pharaoh took Moshe to the palace. So here we see that she was the big sister. She was, I believe, 5 years old when this incident that I just described happened. So she is very connected to the water. But more than that, when Moshe was born, so she said to her parents, the Redeemer has just been born. Moshe is going to be the Redeemer. So she had prophetic sight. So it took, though, 80 years until her prophecy was fulfilled. God appeared to Moshe at the burning bush when Moshe was 80 years old. And only then did he become the Redeemer. So all those years, it's like bitter waters. She had this prophecy, and yet the slavery continued for another 80 years. So her waters were bitter. But when they came to the Reed Sea and it was opened, a miracle, and Israel passed through the Reed Sea. And then when it was closed upon the approaching Egyptians, so we sang the song of the sea. And then afterwards, the Torah says that Miriam gathered up all of the women with their drums and their timbrels, and they also sang the song. She led all the women in the song of the sea. So these are the elevated waters. So we see her name of Miriam, Maryam, and Ramyam, both have to do with water, have to do with Miriam. So let's see a little bit deeper. What is this well of Miriam? Again, it's described as this rock or well that would accompany Israel. So the Maharal, understanding that we might need to take this symbolically, so he understood that the well of Miriam, this rock, this well represented God's divine providence, hashgacha pratit. The people needed water. They were in the desert because God brought them out of Egypt. And so God was providing the manna, the food from heaven, and he was providing the water. So the Maharal understands, yes, it was on the zchut of Miriam, but it represents God's divine providence. So this idea of a rock being connected to God in some way. So there is an expression that we refer to God as the Tzur Yisrael. We actually say this right before the Amidah in the morning, before the cardinal prayer of Judaism, the Amidah. So we say Tzur Yisrael, Kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, the rock of Israel, which means the strength of Israel, should help us. And at Hanukkah time, so in English, it's translated Rock of Ages. Ma'oz Tzur Yeshuati. Like the strength of the rock of God is my salvation. So again, in English, it's translated as the rock. God is the strength of Israel. And what's interesting is when Israel declared its independence, so it has what we'll call a declaration of independence. And at that time, the vast majority of people in Israel were secular. There was definitely a religious and a traditional element, but the vast majority of the settlers were secular. Today, the religious segment of Israel has grown tremendously. In fact, the majority of people in Israel consider themselves either religious or traditional. But then it was different. And so when it came to the wording of the Declaration of Independence, so of course the religious wanted God's name mentioned, God's presence, God's providence. And apparently there was a lot of disagreement. And what they settled in the end is they referred to God as Tzur Yisrael, the rock of Israel. instead of many, many other ways that they could have referred to God and names of God, he's in the Declaration of Independence, he's called Sur Yisrael, the Rock of Israel, Rock of Ages. So that's how we understand very much this idea of the well of Miriam, that it really represents God's helping, but we acknowledge that it was on the merit of Miriam. From the two stories that we told of her prophecy about Moshe, her accompanying Moshe and not giving up on him and waiting 80 years and then singing the song at the sea. So on her merit, there was water in the desert. So then the question is asked, well, what happened to this well? So this is a subject of much discussion, and especially because, again, it's not exactly clear what this well was that accompanied them. It could be that just God directed them to these different oases where there was water. But nonetheless, there's two ideas. One is that when we came to Israel, it came with us and it ended in the Mediterranean. But the more, we'll call it popular idea, is that it's in Yam Kinneret. It's in the Sea of Galilee. And there's a very, very famous story of the Arizal and his top student, Rabbi Chaim Vital. The teachings of the Arizal were incredibly deep, complex, spiritual, high. And Rabbi Chaim Vital, who was brilliant in his own right, sometimes had a hard time grasping the depths of these teachings. So the story is that the Arizal took him to Yam Kinneret, and they took a boat out to somewhere in the Yam Kinneret, and at a certain point he stopped the boat and he took a cup of water and he said, "Drink this. This is coming from the well of Miriam. And if you drink this, you'll be able then to understand my teachings." So this is a very famous story that's handed down by tradition. And there, as we learn, Miriam dies in the month of Nisan. And so there are many, many different women's groups that go up to the Yam Kinneret and celebrate and commemorate Miriam. So that's done to this day. To this day, maybe we didn't mourn her properly. So these different groups of women are doing a great service for Israel by remembering her and the great merit she had with all of Israel. Now for our third insight. And this is based on a verse and a Rashi. So another incident that happens in this parsha is we're approaching the land of Israel. This parsha is already happening in the 40th year already. We're getting closer and closer to Eretz Israel, and we wanted to cross through the land of Edom. Edom is where Jordan is today. And we wanted to cross through their land in order to enter Israel by Jericho. And so the verse says that Moshe is speaking to the leaders of Edom and saying, "Please let us pass through your land. We won't touch anything. We'll pay for any water that we use. We won't move left or right from the straight path through. We just want to pass through. And he's trying to explain the history of the Jewish people. So he says, he tells them about how they were oppressed in Egypt. And it says, V'nitzak el Hashem v'yishma kolenu. We cried out to God, and he heard our voice. V'yishlach malach v'yotzienu mimitzrayim. And he sent an angel. And this angel took us out of Egypt. So Rashi says, well, who is this angel? So he says very clearly, Ze Moshe. Mikan she hanaviim kruim malachim. And he says, from here we learn, the sages tell us that in different places, the prophets are called angels. So this is what I want to discuss now. I want to discuss this idea is, why is Moshe being called an angel? Why doesn't the verse just say, and God sent a messenger? God sent a person. God sent, well, see, it's Moshe who's speaking here. So he doesn't want to say, maybe God sent me. Nonetheless, it's very interesting that a person is called a malach. So I want to explore this slightly. We also have a number of places that people are called Elohim. Elohim is a name of God. It's one of the most important names of God. And yet, in certain cases, judges are called Elohim, which we would usually translate as God, but here, no, it's translated as judges. Every day we say one of the Psalms that the Levim said in the temple. The Psalm for the third day mentions this, that here, and it's in the Torah itself, that judges are sometimes called Elohim. In the book of Malachi, in the second chapter, the 7th verse, so it says like this. The context is the prophet is hearing God talking about the exalted place of the Leviim and the Kohanim in their service of God. So it says, Ki sifte kohen yishmaru da'at, v'torah yivakshu mipihu, that the words, the lips of the kohen, the priest, should keep knowledge, and the Torah that comes from his mouth you should seek out. Ki malach Hashem tzavakotu, because he is a malach, he is an angel of the God of hosts. So here again, a person is called an angel. So there are a number of other cases where either a person is called by the name of God or by a name of an angel. So let's try to understand this a little bit. So first of all, we see something very interesting in the Talmud in Chagiga 15b, following up on what we just read from Malachi. It says, if your teacher appears to you like an angel, then you should learn from him. But if he doesn't appear to you like an angel, Like, don't waste your time. In other words, here we're talking about something that many people don't have a proper experience of, and that's the teacher-student relationship. I think most people somewhere along the line, junior high, high school, elementary school, college, had a teacher that had a profound effect on them. Doesn't happen all the time, but every once in a while, a teacher really makes a mark in a person's life. But the teacher-student relationship in Judaism is a lifelong relationship. It's not like you took a course with this teacher, he had a big influence on you, and you always remember them and appreciate them, but you don't keep a relationship. In Judaism, the teacher-student relationship is very essential. So here it says, if you want to learn from someone, but they don't appear to you like a malach, like an angel, don't waste your time. Find a teacher that is like awesome in your eyes, that you have a soul connection, a deep soul connection, so much so that he appears to you sometimes to be like an angel. So what is an angel? So the two things that we could say, now obviously we only have very limited time here. The whole book could be written about this. An angel, either we can understand as an energy form. It's a form of energy that we refer to as an angel. But the actual meaning of an angel is a messenger. An angel is a messenger of God. Now we can understand the verse that we brought when it says that God sent an angel to take the Israel out of Egypt. So here we can understand that malach, even in the literal sense, means a messenger. So a person can also be a messenger.
To show everybody and tell everybody about Rabbi Yitzchak.
Okay, afterwards. Okay.
Because he looks like a malach in this, and that was his nickname.
Okay.
Hamalach is it.
Okay, my wife, I have to honor my wife. Just the other day, I found this picture of Rav Ginsburg. I think everyone knows or should know that he just underwent a kidney transplant. We hear he is doing very well. But for a long time, he lives in Kfar Chabad. For a long time, he was referred to as Hamalach. He was referred to as the angel, because his teachings are on such a elevated level, such a uplifting level. Many people refer to him as the Malach. So I'm honoring my wife here, who came in to show me this. And while we do it, we should all continue to pray for Rav Yitzchak Feivish ben Braina Malka. Should have a refuah shlema and continue to be able to teach all of Israel these incredible Torahs that he teaches. So a malach is a messenger. Now we can go back to the book of Bereshit, when Yaakov is coming back into the land. So Parshat Vayishlach begins, Vayishlach malachim el Esav. Yaakov sent, and you look at almost any English translation, it will say messengers. He sent malachim to Esav. What does Rashi say? An incredible Rashi. 2 words, malachim mamish. He sent real angels as his messengers to Esav. Now, that doesn't mean that he didn't send also physical messengers, but Rashi is trying to tell us that the battle that would take place between Yaakov and Esav after 20 years, and it finally took place the night before, and that's what we're told, that who did Yaakov wrestle with? Yaakov says with the angel of Esav. So here, the battle was on a very, very high spiritual level. And so that's what Rashi says, Malachim Mamash. So here we see that we can be Malachim to each other. We can be messengers of help, good tidings, assistance. And like we said, if your teacher doesn't appear to you like a malach, find someone else. Not that you can't learn from them, but again, we're talking about a lifelong relationship. It says in the Gemara that a student only really grasps the teachings of his teacher after 40 years. After 40 years. And I remember I went to Rav Ginsburg pretty much close to the 40th anniversary of my learning with him. And we made a l'chaim. And I said, hopefully now I can really begin to integrate your teachings. Right now, I am close to 50 years. This coming February will be 50 years. Hopefully, I am grasping a little bit more. So having said that, I want to bring a Torah from Rav Ginsburg. But before, I just want to mention that some of you may have this book, Life, Soul, and Consciousness Within All Creation. And one of the articles, which also appears in Fruits of the Orchard, is called Animals, Angels, and Humans. And they have something in common. They're all called with the name Chaya. Chaya means life. The first animals, actually with the fish, were called Nefesh Chaya, living souls. But here the word for soul is Nefesh. Human beings are also called Nefesh Chaya, but we're also called, that God blew into our nostrils, Nishmat Chayim, the soul of life. But also, when you look at especially the prophecy of Ezekiel, angels are also called Chayot HaKodesh. So the point is that animals, humans, and angels all have something in common. Here, we're talking about that sometimes messengers, human messengers, are also called malachim, but also we have a level of angel within us. We have a level of angel within us. And the idea of an angel is a messenger of God. How do we see this numerically? The word malach is gematria 91. 91 is when you take the four-letter name of God, a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey, it equals 26. But we don't say the name of God. We say a different name of God, which are the letters Aleph and Daled and Nun and Yun. The name Adni, that equals 65. When you add 26 and 65, it equals 91. And so we can understand a malach is a messenger of God. They share the same gematria. They share the same gematria. But let's look more on the practical level. The Lubavitcher Rebbe sent out mishulachim. He sent out messengers, a shaliach. And a shaliach is the Hebrew for messenger. And just like an angel of God, if you look through the Tanakh, you'll see that many times the prophecies are given over by an angel of God. It's an angel of God that comes and tells Avram, don't go forward with the sacrifice of Isaac. At first, it's an angel that appears to Moshe at the burning bush. It's an angel that appears to the wife of, to the mother of Shimshon. It's an angel that appears to Gideon. But they're a messenger of God. And so the messenger is like the one who sends them. And that's why the Chabad movement is so strong, is because the Rebbe empowered each of the messengers that he sent out with his power, his inspiration. And so each one of them is like a malach. We call them a shliach, but they're also like a malach. So here, I just want to end with a deep Torah from Rav Ginsburg, is that he says, and this is taken from a number of different sources, that the last creation of the 6 days of creation are human beings. We're actually told that the angels were created according to most midrashim, on the 2nd day. Fish were already created on the 5th day, and birds and the land animals on the 6th day. But the last thing in creation is the human being. And so Rav Ginsburg explains, I'm actually simplifying this, it's part of a much, much bigger context, that if you ask, who is on a higher level, an angel or a human being? So maybe our first initial response would be an angel. An angel is a messenger of God. It doesn't, it has, in a sense, no will of its own. It just carries out God's will. And it's spiritual, and it's just this energy. But we're told that's not correct. That paradoxically, because we have a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Ra, a good inclination and evil inclination, an angel does not have any free will. Only a human being has free will. Animals don't have free will. They act according to survival and pleasure. And they make decisions, but that's not called free will. And angels carry out the will of God. But a human being has free will. And in a certain way, that is maybe the closest to understanding what does it mean to be in the image of God, is the idea of free will. And so Rav Ginsburg explains that the meaning of a human being being the last in creation is that all built in to all of creation is we'll call it the desire, or the going into the direction towards human beings. That's why we'll call it the food chain. That plants grow in the earth, which is the mineral world, and then animals or human beings eat the produce, or animals eat the produce, and then we eat the animals. Or if you're a vegetarian, so you eat you bypass the animal. But there's like a food chain, but there's also a chain of consciousness and soul. And so all of creation is attempting to reach the level of a human being, of the consciousness of a human being. So that is quite paradoxical. It's very, very paradoxical. And we see it in Yom Kippur. And with this, we'll end the class. We're told one of the reasons that we dress in white and we don't eat, we don't drink, we don't anoint ourselves, we don't wash, we don't have intimate relations, is to be like the angels on Yom Kippur. It's to be angelic. But that's only one day of the year. That's not the ultimate purpose. The ultimate purpose is really in the other 364 days of the year. But what would we do without Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur kind of makes the year. But we're trying to be like angels, but really the rest of the year, we're trying to be human. And being a human, like you look at the word Adam, the Aleph is, in a sense, the part of us that's angelic, the divine soul. And the Dam is the blood, is the body. So a human being is animal, angel, and human. And that's why the word Chaya is connected to all three of them. So we should be blessed to use our free will in a way that really, really makes us in the image of God.